Perfect. All right. We are starting the December 20th board work session. We will start with roll call for call of order. Brett?
Denise Diamond.
She'll be excused.
Zachary Mulholland.
Here.
Mike Eister.
Here.
Austin Fullnagy.
Here.
Steve Mattel.
Steve Mattel is excused.
Kevin Altucker.
Here.
And Lisa Fregala.
Present.
Excellent. Moving on, we'll go to the land recognition. We have Jonathan Campbell to provide the land recognition. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Campbell. I am the Director for Budget and Resource Planning. I'd like to start our meeting with the acknowledgement that the land we are on is traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people. The Kalapuya were stewards of this very land for over 14,000 years before their traditional way of life was forever disrupted. We start our meeting with humility and reverence for the original inhabitants, the Kalapuya.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any questions or comments in regards to the information requests by the board? And seeing none, we'll move on to adoption of the agenda with flexibility. I will need a motion for this.
So move.
Excellent. And we have a second?
Second.
Excellent. We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote to make it official.
Denise Diamond.
Here.
Zachary. Yes.
For adoption of the agenda with flexibility, indicate yes or no, Denise?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks. Zachary Mulholland.
Yes.
Mike Eister.
Yes.
Austin Fullnagy.
Yes.
Kevin Altucker.
Yes.
And Lisa Fregala.
That was a yes.
You were muted, Lisa, but it looked like yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you so much. With that flexibility, we're actually going to move on to discussion items, but we are going to cover Titan Court first. That way we can allow for the speakers on Zoom to be able to return to get off the meeting a little early here. So with that, Dr. Bulger?
Yes, we are pleased to present this information regarding Titan Court, and I'm going to turn over the time to Mike Blay to introduce it.
Thank you, Dr. Bulger, members of the board. As all of you know, we've had a couple of discussions about Titan Court. It's come up multiple times in public comment. It's certainly come up in the suggestion box when we had that. It may still be open. I don't know if we're still getting suggestions, but it did come up multiple times in the suggestion box about what to do with Titan Court. Should we sell it or somehow change something about it? And so we wanted to bring sort of a presentation and bring in some experts so that you all could hear something about Titan Court and the situation there. Before we get started, I wanted to point out there in your board packet, there's a historical document from about 4 years ago, the December board meeting in 2019. It has some background. A lot of obviously the financial information is dated, so I think you can skip over that. But a lot of the information there's the non-financial information is still valid. So if you have questions about kind of the history of Titan Court, what goes on there, what was talked about in 2019, that document is there kind of just to give you a little background. So for this presentation, I'm going to be sort of the master of ceremonies. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and we've got the first two, and I don't know how they're going to split up their time, but John Brown and David Holland, which are they're with the Evans Elder Commercial Real Estate Company. They're commercial real estate brokers, I assume, and they have been looking at Titan Court for us from a sort of a commercial real estate lens, and they're going to talk a little bit about the situation with Titan Court currently, given that sort of that lens. So I'll turn it over to John or David. I don't know which one wants to start, but feel free to go ahead.
Well, I'll start if I may. Good evening, and thank you for having us. By way of background, I've been in the either appraising or brokerage for almost 40 years, and all in the Eugene Springfield area. So I believe I'm somewhat familiar with the market, and my associate David Holland has been equally involved, and he actually specializes in multifamily. So that's an aside. We've been asked to take a very broad look at Titan Court and offer suggestions of what may happen on the economic end of where it is. It's 75 units, as you know, and it's somewhat atypical the way it's designed and constructed. because of the way that the occupancy is set. It's a student housing complex, but it's not in close proximity to the University of Oregon. And we've all seen what has happened with the new high rises on Franklin Boulevard, and there's 3 under construction on 13th and a 4th coming out of the ground next year. So there's quite a bit of new construction it's not in direct competition with this, but normally we would hope that your facility could provide an opportunity for U of O students, but it's just not proximate enough to the university, and with the new ones, it challenges. We looked at the income, we've looked at the expenses, and in the prior appraisal and things such as that. We've looked at your rents. Your rents are within the parameters of what we think is market rent. It's right where it should be. And but there are some things that, and David, chime in anytime you want. There's some things we would maybe in summarizing that we would suggest to maybe help you with your financial analysis, because I think after this conversation, you'll probably want to ask a question or two about what can we do. And if you can't increase your income, you could look to reduce your expenses, because right now, if we were to analyze it, that we're not going to be at a number, because you got to remember your expenses don't include property taxes, and a private entity would, and you're already running at a 50% expense ratio, and in the market we see properties of this character running more like in the mid-30s. So it's your expense, 32%, and the information we have, it's in the 50% range, and so we would look to reduce that. David, would you like to say more about the multifamily market? We got about 2 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, just from the 30,000 foot level, it's been a pretty tough and challenging time in the multifamily world, as rates have gone up, even with the strength of demand and high occupancy rates, high rent growth. There's been very little transactions as the interest rate environment has crept up, because it's changed valuations so dramatically. Sellers still want to sell at kind of pre-interest rate market levels, say at 5% rates of return, and buyers can't make those math equations work. They need to buy at 6 or 6.5% rates of return, and that delta just is a straight price / value drop to sellers. And basically the market is sort of crept to a halt because that gap just can't really be bridged just yet. Sellers don't want to sell. They're saying they're 100, we're full, we're making money, we've got rent growth, we've got high occupancy. Why would I want to sell this asset? Because at a 10% discount, unless there's a colossal need to make that transaction happen. So the market's really ground to a halt. As an example, there's a 19 unit, 70 bed facility in a great location on the U of O campus at 18th and Hilliard. That's been on the market for 60 days and hasn't sold. In any typical time past, that would have sold quickly and turned over very quickly, and there's just not the transactional demand out there. So there's that piece of the puzzle.
If I may, to close that, when you're looking at analyzing it, you have your net income, and we've seen some indications where you're in the $800,000-$900,000 a year range. It's an inverse relationship when you capitalize the income. The lower the rate, the higher the value. So as the rate goes up, when the cap rate or the interest rate goes from 6 to 7, or 5 to 6, it makes a significant difference. But the higher the rate, the lower the value. And rates have gone up, and so values have gone down. Sorry, that's my timer. I think we're out of time, so go ahead.
Well, I don't know if you're out of time, but if
Okay.
maybe the board might have some questions for you all, and that way we can kind of we got sort of 3 segments to this presentation. So if you've got questions about the commercial real estate portion of it, this would be probably a good time to hit David and John.
Absolutely. We got Lisa and then Mike. Lisa, go ahead.
So you said you were looking at our income and our
expenses. So is our expense ratio that high because of the debt burden we carry?
No, we analyze properties prior to debt service. So your interest and in your mortgage payments, which net operating income before any servicing of debt. Your expenses are inordinately high. I think you would want to look first at management and marketing, or some of the things that stuck out to us that were atypical.
Those are
There's
giant numbers.
Yeah, very high. And there's expenses that are variable and fixed. And the variable, the ones that move with occupancy, and the fixed are the ones that you can't, that, you know, you're going to insure that building no matter what, if it's full or half full. And variable would be like repairs and maintenance and some of the utilities and things such as that. So, but generally speaking, those are the first two categories we would look at. You have some marketing expenses in there and some management expenses in there that we would try and hone down if we could.
Thank you very much.
Mike?
Hi, John. It's Mike Eister.
Mike?
So we have some advantages to the college in Titan Court in that that are hard to quantify. So I'm wondering if there's a way that you can help us evaluate that. We think that it's a high value to international students, to their families, to know that their students are going to be living in campus-owned, operated housing. And we think that that particularly attracts international students, but it's very hard to put a number on there or a value on it. Can you help us play with that a little bit?
Yeah, from going back to my appraisal background, there's two ways to evaluate a property. There's value in use and value in exchange. We're dealing with value in exchange in an open market transaction. Value in use is the value to a particular user, and in this particular case, this is a business asset that's involved in real estate. And so when you look at it from your internal things, the way that you would evaluate it is not only the students would look at what we call the principle of substitution. What would be the cost of acquiring an equally desirable substitute property that would perform the same level of utility and value added that this particular asset does to you? And so the fact that you have some X number of students and they bring in Y number of tuition and things such as that is something that would be outside of our purview to do. That's, I mean, you're the educators, you're in the school business, you can evaluate that much better than we can because we don't get into that. But that's the value to one particular user. Market value is predicated on value in exchange. But there would be a way to analyze this asset in the context of a business rather than in just a plain real estate like we're looking at it.
Thanks.
Zach, and then I'll put myself in the queue. Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, thanks for coming and speaking with us tonight. You mentioned our expense ratio of 50% compared to comparables of around 30%. My thinking is that one of the contributors to that is the residence assistants, the live-in staff at the facility. And I was just wondering, do the comparables, are they including kind of staff support like that, or would they be like dorms, or would it be facilities that don't have residence assistants like that, staff on site?
Well, David will answer that, but I will say that most of them have on-site residents, all of them, the bigger ones.
Yeah, so like actually we were just touring Chase Flats yesterday, and they have the same kind of things. They have a model apartment and they have staff in the building, and yeah, their expense ratios tick up a little bit higher, but we're talking about a point or two. We're not talking about 20 points.
And I will also add that the expense ratios that are in the low to mid 30s, those include property taxes.
Right.
And you don't have property taxes in that equation. And generally speaking, in any income property, the largest single operating expenses are property taxes, followed by utilities.
Thank you. Gotcha. You partially answered my question. So property management obviously is not one of the top two expenses that other similar facilities would have. What is the property management amount that you're seeing with facilities that are of similar size and so forth?
they're for these kinds of larger projects, they're probably, it's depending on how they're staffed and what combination of on-site, off-site model they typically use. You should be in the 7 to 9% range on scheduled gross income.
Understood. Thank you. Well, kind of a follow-up question. Obviously, we're at fair market or at or below fair market value for rent. Do you find that there's a correlation between the percentile of costs and expenditures and market value rents? So I'm sure that a company that's closer to 30%, they might have rents above market value potentially in regards to student housing. Or do you think there's no correlation between fair market and percentile of expenses?
Well, sure. I mean, if you're charging $10 instead of what should be $15, that's just going to be you're going to have a higher percentage number, and that's going to go out of whack when you have under market rents. But I don't think your rents are all that far off from where they should be. From what I remember we looked at when we did this analysis. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, I do think as you go to top, when you get to full market rent, those typical expenses from a percentage basis should fall more into line.
Totally. And with other properties similar to this, is there that correlation?
I believe so. I'd really have to go back, and I haven't really looked at that.
Not a problem. Thank you. Lisa? Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm just going to say, looking at a rent comparison chart, we looked at, there's 9 rental comparisons, and out of those 9, there's only 2 higher than you. You average of $278 a square foot on the per square foot. One's at $3, one's $3.42, and then it ranges all the way down to $1.41, depending on which ones they are and where they are. So we think you're at, or rents were not increased this year. The market vacancy went from 2 to 3%. I know that's not a big jump, but if you do it as a percentage, it is. And rents were softer this year. We got privileged information from Zoe Schwartz, who used to work with me, and she surveys 7,000 units and 13,000 beds all around campus, and has an incredibly good handle. And she's the lady that did the appraisal for you in 2019.
She's definitely the dean of information about multifamily information in Lane County. No question.
Awesome. Lisa.
So you mentioned utilities, and we have quite a unique situation there because of the way the 2 buildings are connected. So are we able to differentiate the utility expenses on the Titan Court side as compared to the Mary Spildy side?
I will let, I think, is Randy Nishimura or somebody from his firm going to speak, because when we kind of prep for this, we understand that there's we're kind of the economic aspect. He's the physical aspect.
I can wait. Is that you're referring to Robertson Sherwood Architects? So I can wait to ask that question again. Thank you.
Perfect. Any other questions? Seeing none, we can move on to the next section.
Okay.
I really appreciate both of you and your expertise on this matter. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here, would you like us to stick around till the end of the discussion?
Just in case. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the next speaker, Lisa, was a perfect segue, because the next speaker is Randy Nishimura from Robertson Sherwood Architects, and he was intimately involved in designing the building, I believe, and has some knowledge about how the 2 buildings are interconnected. I think everybody on the board knows that, and so I'm going to introduce Randy Nishimura.
Welcome.
Thank you, members of the board, and the opportunity to speak this evening. I'll preempt Lisa's question basically to say that the 2 facilities are inextricably tied. The prospect of attempting to separate them in any physical way is really problematic. Both buildings, both Titan Court and the Spildy Center share key building systems. They include the geothermal system, which provides the primary heating and cooling source for both buildings. A gas-fired boiler is shared, the chiller and cooling tower, the building automation system, the primary water service, the domestic hot water system, the rainwater harvesting system, that where water is reclaimed from the roof runoff to provide, it's not exactly gray water, but it's for flushing toilets. The primary electrical service and the emergency generator are all shared. They're co-shared by both facilities. Overall, the downtown campus was purpose designed to achieve some very ambitious goals for sustainability and carbon reduction. I'm sure you're all aware of that. Spildy Center achieving LEED Platinum certification and the Titan Court receiving LEED Gold. The primary mechanical rooms and electrical service entrance is shared by both buildings. They occur in the podium level of Titan Court. So right there, if you imagine any attempt to separate the two buildings physically, you would have to find or replace the facilities that are effectively in Titan Court, that portion of the campus, somehow in the Spildy Center. And it's not an easy prospect. Dividing the centralized mechanical, plumbing, and electrical systems that serve both buildings would be very costly, as you might imagine, and would require duplication of current systems that serve both facilities. Dividing the centralized mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems would be impractical without compromising the sustainability goals. So you would be at risk of losing the LEED certification for both facilities. And the physical process of separating the buildings would require the complete vacation of both for an extended period of time during the physical transition. There's an extensive amount of, initially there would be an extensive amount of design work that would be necessary to basically suss out how that would be achieved. And then the physical transition would require an extensive remodeling and renovation of the facilities. I guess to be blunt about this, the prohibitive costs and logistical complications associated with separating the systems means that it's probably likely to be achievable, and therefore a legal framework for how those systems might be maintained, operated, and paid for would need to be developed if there was any idea or goal of actually selling Titan Court as an asset to another owner. You would have to somehow find a means to divide responsibilities for the systems. So that in a nutshell is, probably not, sunshine and butterflies. It's the reality. We designed the facility as a single campus, utilizing and being as economical as possible to take advantage of centralized systems that serve both. So with that, are there any questions?
Any questions from the board? Lisa, was your question answered?
Yeah, I mean, I had understand, and thank you for that information. I had understood from previous conversations how inexplicably tied the two buildings are. I mean, they're not really two buildings, but it was very helpful to hear in detail what we're thinking about. The question I asked previously was really about the expense of the utilities. Do we have one utility expense for the entire campus? I like that you use that word. Or are the expenses of the utilities divided between the Spildy Center and Titan Court?
I believe, and I might turn to Jennifer. I believe that they are a single expenditure, correct? And there is separate metering for aspects of Titan Court.
Yeah. So water and natural gas are all one meter. Electricity, there's a few different meters, but it's not a perfect divided out. There's a meter in each apartment, but some of the electrical services that are metered are shared between the two buildings.
And it's sub-metering, so you still have a single service for the entire facility, for the entire campus.
Understood. Kevin?
Randy, I'm wondering if you can comment on the the economic feasibility of the LEED equipment at LEED status, platinum and gold. Those are desirable goals, but how has it worked out economically?
Again, I might have to turn to Jennifer to answer that question, but my understanding is that the modeled performance when we were in a design phase indicated that performance would be very good. In reality, I think it hasn't performed as well as the modeling would have suggested. The solar hot water array, I'm sure you're already aware, has not been maintenance was part of the problem. It wasn't performing as expected. There were complications related to its maintenance. And so at this point, you've lost the benefit of that solar hot water array for preheating the domestic hot water supply. So just to generalize, I would say that it's not performing up to the LEED standards in terms of how we modeled the performance during design. Certainly could be an improvement there, but that would require restoration of the hot water array, which is not going to happen at this point, amongst other things.
Thank you.
It is still our best performing building, though, per square foot. It costs the least for utilities with that building.
Understood.
But that's a reflection of how high the standard was set for the building during design. I mean, initially we were actually tasked with pursuing the possibility of a net zero facility. And ultimately ended up at LEED Platinum for a number of reasons, one of which was the fact that you had the energy management program in the building and you had different types of mechanical systems, including ones that relied on fossil fuel use, which basically disqualified it from achieving the net zero or the, what's it called? There were a number of standards that were being pursued at that time.
Gotcha.
Follow up.
Yep, absolutely.
I hear that it's the best performing building, but my question was more of, did the investment in acquiring the LEED status, has that been economically feasible? I mean, I don't know what the payback period on that is, but can you comment on that?
Kevin, I can't with any accuracy. I would say that there was a payback period that was again, part of our energy modeling, and that I can't recall off the top of my head what that payback period was. It wasn't a really extensive period of time. There was a premium paid for some of the systems that were included in the facility because it was intended. The goal or the mandate at the time was that we were trying to develop for the college an exemplary project that was utilizing some of the state-of-the-art energy conservation measures at that time.
Yeah.
I would think that because it has performed, well relative to other campus facilities here, that there certainly has paid back some of that investment in those systems. Part of the complication or part of the cost was also incurred in terms of the number of systems that were included, again, in support of the energy management system. So there were more different types of mechanical systems incorporated than would be the case with any other building because of the goal of trying to provide a teaching facility that would provide the energy management program with access to a number of systems.
Gotcha.
Mike, and then I actually have a question kind of similar to what you were talking about, but yeah, Mike.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to John and just ask, with your experience and background in commercial real estate, is there any other use of the Titan Court that might make sense in terms of cost effectiveness?
So let me understand your question, Mike. You mean an alternative use, non-residential?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
No, I mean, that thing with that building was designed and constructed for a particular occupancy type. I mean, even trying to convert it back to a conventional apartments would be cost prohibitive. The costs right now to do any interior demising and retrofitting, especially because of your the type of construction with the LEED, that's pretty expensive to retrofit. So I would say no, that there isn't. And then an identifiable use, I mean, not retail, not office certainly isn't in the mix. And so you're limited to those two types of uses in the C3 zone. So no.
Thanks.
Understood.
Kind of long, and I really appreciate what you were asking there, Kevin, in regards to economics of the LEED certified. And my question to both John and David, is there any value added to the two properties that have additional environmental well, essentially, I think you know what I'm asking, but yeah, is there additional value added to asset value of the building?
I think John and I were both talking about this, and I unfortunately, it's my opinion only. I'd say that that is a only mild, limited value add at best.
Understood.
Yeah, I'll add there to the private sector doesn't do LEED as much. I mean, you look at how many private buildings are done to that. They would do it in a minute if it made economic sense. They're really expensive to re-demise. The Inkwell building that out in Tennyson Square out on Crescent Avenue. It's very, very expensive to repurpose and re-tenant, to move walls and things such as that. And then you have, new systems that have shorter lives. I mean, a traditional heat pump's 20 to 30 years, and a lot of that solar is a lot less. And so you have a recapture. So I have not seen any premium in the market for that because it just doesn't. The financial feasibility of it is challenging.
Understood. Denise?
So, could you, yeah. So if I understand correctly, some of the systems decisions, right, and designs were because of an energy management program, right?
Correct.
So fiscally, we're asking fiscal return questions about the building and its certification and some of its unique options, so to say. Do we know anything about the fiscal return of this energy management program? As in, how well that's gone? Has the enrollment in that increased? What's going on with that?
I don't think that's a question for me to answer.
I think that's my question and John's question, and I don't think I can answer it off the top of my head, but I could get back with you on it. I do also know that we do have some third party and grant funding that supports that program. But if I could get back with you, that would be the most accurate if I could do that.
Thank you. I appreciate it, because what I hear in the questions, right, is a focus, and appropriately so, on the fiscal aspects, right, and the returns and what are the choices and the options. I did make note that if that a recommend, right, for the inordinately high expenses would probably focus on marketing and management expenses, right? So I think I heard you say that it's a matter of decreasing expenditures. But since we do have program there, and a lot of the system's placement and design was for program, I think we also have to look at program enhancement as an opportunity as well.
Absolutely. And part of the reason why we have this presentation is also because we are a rather new board, and the history. I mean, I think it was Lisa and Mike, you were the only two that were around during these initial reports. I know there was multiple meetings done in regards to this very topic. Titan Court tends to come up annually, usually around budgeting season, but so yeah, this is a common thing that is discussed and brought up, and I wanted to make sure that everyone has a baseline knowledge of everything. And I think that 2019 report gives kind of that baseline knowledge and understanding, and this is also just a great opportunity to ask additional questions and additional comments.
Yeah.
Zach?
I'm gonna have a follow-up question at the end. Do we have a third presentation? Yeah, let's get to that because we're running out of time.
Exactly.
All right, so the final presenter is Jennifer Cordova. She is an attorney with Hawkins, Delafield and Wood, which I believe was intimately involved in the bonds. And I think her specialty more is tax, really. Her partner was unable to be here, whose specialty is bond. So I think Jennifer probably knows enough to be dangerous anyway on the bonds. So if you have a super detailed, specific bond question, she may defer, and we'll get back to you on that. But it's great that she could be here to answer to talk a little bit about the legalities of trying to sell Titan Court now and in the future. So I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. As mentioned, I'm the tax lawyer with Hawkins, Delafield and Wood, and my partner Gogan Orr is the bond counsel. We've represented college for many years in its borrowings, including the borrowings that originally were issued to finance Titan Court, and then the last refinancing or the refinancing of Titan Court, which happened in 2016. All right, so these laws governing the full faith and credit obligations like these, and that also govern the use of the facilities that are financed, include both state law and federal tax law requirements. And the federal tax law requirements come in because the financing for Titan Court was done on a federally tax exempt basis, which was your best cost of borrowing. So if you were to consider a sale of Titan Court, there would be both state law and federal tax laws that you would need to consider. Under the state law, which is Gogan's area, but as mentioned, I know enough to be dangerous. There is a Oregon constitutional lending of credit prohibition, and that prohibition basically says that a government can't issue debt that's backed by its general fund, which would include full faith and credit obligations like these, if the borrowing benefits a private party. And so what that means in practice, if you were thinking about selling Titan Court to a private party, the college would need to pay off the debt in connection with the transfer of ownership. So once the ownership was being transferred, the debt would need to be paid off. Now, in this case, these 2016 obligations, excuse me, are not prepayable until 2027, which is really standard in the market to have a 10-year prepayment option in those transactions. And so because they can't actually be redeemed, paid off in 2027, what that means is the college would have to legally pay off the debt upon transfer of ownership and would need to do that by setting aside money in a formal escrow account with an escrow agent to pay off the debt. Basically, money would be transferred into that escrow in an amount that, with any interest earnings on the investments in that escrow, would be sufficient to make any principal or interest payments on that debt through 2027, when it would be prepayable, and have enough money in that escrow to then prepay anything that hadn't yet been paid. So any maturities after 2027 will be prepaid at that date. So how expensive that escrow would be would depend on when Titan Court was sold. The closer to the 2027 prepayment date, the cheaper the escrow. It also depend on the investments in that escrow, and the rate on those investments. So that would be the way to stay in compliance with the state law if you were to sell Titan Court to a private party. So that applies to a private party sale. That wouldn't apply to a sale to another government, for example. Then there's the federal tax rules, which is sort of my area of expertise. They're similar with this kind of situation. So if Titan Court was sold to a private party, the college would need to take what's called under the tax regulations a remedial action. And one of the remedial actions, and the reason for the remedial action is because you want to maintain the tax exempt status of those obligations so that the bondholders who are holding those obligations, frankly, don't get taxed, don't come back and sue you for violating the tax covenants that you made when they were issued. So you would take a remedial action. And one of the permissible remedial actions under the tax rules is to set up a defeasance escrow, it would be satisfied. The defeasance escrow you would need under state law would satisfy the tax law requirement as well. It would be the same thing. The one additional requirement under the tax rules is that the investments in the escrow can't exceed the arbitrage yield. So basically the average rate on your 2016 obligations, which was just north of 2%, so like 2.29% arbitrage yield. So in the market today, you could get investments that yielded more than that, but you would be restricted to that yield on the investments in the escrow in order to satisfy the tax rules. So those are the two main legal requirements for these bonds, for these obligations. If you were to sell Titan Court, you'd have to basically pay off all the debt with a defeasance escrow that frankly could be fairly pricey, but is possible if you
Yeah.
were interested.
Just to maybe put it into terms, maybe I could better understand. So essentially, like when you sell a home, there's obviously the proceeds of the sale essentially pays off the mortgage of a home, essentially. But in that type of scenario, it would be the seller would have to pay off the mortgage before they could sell. And that essentially kind of an example of how that process would go?
Sort of, except in this situation, if you have a sale of a home, that mortgage needs to be paid off in order for the title to transfer on that home. Whereas these obligations were backed by the college's general fund, the full faith and credit, are not backed by the project itself. So from the bondholder's perspective, they who lent you the money for this project, they're like, we just want to get paid. They just want to be paid back. And they won't even allow you to pay them back in 2024. They have investments that they know they can't be prepaid until 2027. So that's the one difference. It's not a legal requirement in that way. You can transfer title because those obligations weren't backed by that project in particular. It was backed by your credit, your general fund credit.
Understood. Thank you. Any other questions?
Go ahead, Zach.
I have some general questions. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I'm just thinking about the last several years of my being on the board. We have gotten impassioned pleas to sell Titan Court. And I just want to encourage all of my board colleagues to think, is there any possible question that we have left unasked? Because the people who have wanted us to sell it have made that argument very loudly and clearly and strongly. And I want to make sure that we cover every possible option before we let these experts go.
Understood. I have a few questions, but Denise?
It sounds as if only another institution that has the same types of tax exemptions as LCC is a viable buyer. Is that an accurate view?
Well, that would be true if you wanted to avoid needing to defease and pay off all the debt. Now, in that case, I would say there's a difference between like nonprofits that are out there and other governments. You would need it to be another government. So if it was another state or local government, another university, another college, something like that, that would work as long as as long as it wasn't a private college. A 501c3 nonprofit might have some of the same possible uses, but that would be still considered a private party under these rules, and you would still need to defease.
Mike, was there anything you wanted to add? Nope. Zach, we have 4 minutes left in this if you want to ask your questions.
Yeah, I think we, as a board, had previously identified the high expenses at this facility as an issue of concern and specifically related to the management contract. It's my understanding that when we approved the year-long extension to the last contract, that there was a idea or plan that we would look at alternatives to that contractor. Is that the case? And what's the timeline for that?
So we're going to have an RFP. I think it's just after the new year, it will go out and we'll see who we get. But yeah, that's the plan, is to put out an RFP. And I mean, that, unlike a private entity, right, where we could go out and just find whoever we wanted, we don't have that opportunity here. So we have to do a request for proposal and see what we get. And if we get a better deal, obviously we're going to take the best deal we get. So that's the plan currently.
If there are other expenses that we should be looking at, during a work session or something, I'd be open to an information session looking at the expense side of things. And I'll just state, very clearly, I do not have an interest in selling Titan Court in the near future or at all. And I think our presenters sort of underlined and put exclamations points on. It would also be incredibly difficult feasibly to do so. So thank you for the
It would be
presentation.
impossible to do so,
Mhm.
to sell
And,
just Titan Court.
yeah.
Because of what Jennifer said, and then you layer that with what Randy said, to separate the buildings, it would be absolutely impossible. You would never be able to do it.
Yeah.
To anybody, public or private.
Thank
At
you.
least not until the bonds are paid off in 2027.
Mhm. Understood.
I should also mention, sorry, that the first call date that you could pay off the bonds are in 2027. You could pay it off early, but I don't think that's the final maturity if you pay it according to its scheduled payments. So I just wanted to mention that.
Understood. Yeah. Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to echo a little bit of what other board members have said. I mean, basically, as painful as the recognition was, the last time we had multiple conversations about this and the report in 2019, we came to the conclusion that the best way to move forward was to keep the asset, continue to pay off the debt, and to bring down the expenses that were affiliated with it so we could hopefully increase the revenue that was coming from it. And I haven't changed that perspective. And I think it's only been strengthened with more information as the years have gone by. So I appreciate all of the, new perspectives that were offered tonight and the opportunity for us to revisit this. Thank you.
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, like I said earlier, this is kind of an annual thing, and it always seems like Titan Court season comes earlier and earlier every year. But but yeah, I do agree. We have this conversation, and then we figure, okay, it's not a good time period to sell it. It's not good. It's there's a lot of things that we cannot do with this. That being said, though, I agree with Denise that there is opportunities for certain expenses. I do look forward to the process in regards to a property management company. I also want to advocate for, like I did when we originally voted for it, I voted no on the proposal, that we consider nonprofits that are out there that that deal with student housing and see if there's opportunities there. Mike, you and I went to a presentation with one of those nonprofits at OCCA. And I think, there's some opportunities here to develop partnerships. So
that OCCA group was just a developer. They didn't manage.
Oh, they were a developer. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're right. There are nonprofit property managers out there as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. We're at time with this topic. We will gather some more information, especially about the energy management side of things, and we will move on to the next topic. Thank you once again to our speakers. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Next, we have the biannual budget forecast. President Bolger.
Yes, we have promised this biannual budget forecast, and we're very, very pleased to be able to present it to you this evening. And I'll turn the time over to John Nisbet.
Well, good evening, everybody. We've got a slide deck. I don't know if I need to share that or someone in the room can do so.
I think Brett's working on that. And
Okay.
a really quick question. Are you okay with questions during your presentation, or should we save them to the end?
I think just for continuity, I'll run through these. We've got about 12 slides, and for consistency, I'll go through that. I think might answer a lot of questions on the way through, and then certainly interested in thoughts and questions at the end here.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, board members, President Belger, thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you this budget forecast that's been developed by the budget office here at Lane. Lots of thanks to our staff. We've got Alejandra, who was before Sue in the spring was the budget office as an individual, who's done phenomenal work on this, as well as Jonathan Campbell, who I think is in the room as our new budget director. So we've certainly increased our capacity and intellect within that group. So let's get into it. So next slide. So some of the economic considerations that are worth thinking about before we get into some of the numbers of the forecast. You may be familiar with the Higher Education Price Index, the HEPI, which is sort of a form of Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The HEPI is or was defined or annually analyzed from the Common Fund Institute, and includes a lot of factors that are very specific, of course, to higher education, that include lots of personnel and salary costs for faculty, administrative, and so forth, as well as fringe benefits, purchase services, material and supply, and utilities. So it's very, very helpful for us on an annual basis to know what that looks like. And of course, it's in the rearview mirror. So the most up-to-date data we have on that is from 2022, which you can see a 5-year trend there in the small chart. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the big picture of that in the next slide. But essentially, it is 5.2% for 2022, which was pretty high, given some of the inflation that you've seen in the environment. The CPI had increased at 7.2%. About half of the CPI is driven by housing costs, and I think we all know what's occurred there. But I think what's also important to note is with that yellow arrow, that orange line is the cumulative higher education price index. And below that is the cumulative CPI. And since the early 80s, you see those two lines diverge. Costs to higher education have increased at a rate much more significantly than the CPI. And that's worth noting because a lot of headlines or discussion about tuition costs really largely center around why has that increased at a rate more than so many other things in the environment. Since the 70s and 80s, when degrees were more affordable, costs to higher education institutions have increased at a much faster rate than a lot of other things in the economic environment. So I thought that was pretty illustrative about what kinds of challenges we're facing financially, at least over the past few decades. So next slide. The HEPI itself is made up of several buckets, much like the Consumer Price Index. So I mentioned about half of it is driven from housing costs. For the HEPI, about 85% of it is weighted to personnel. You also see some other components there of supply of materials and services, utilities. But unique to LCC is that 84% of the operating budget of college is also personnel. So I noted that it's very highly relevant and specific to LCC projections. So it's something we need to make sure we're attuned to, and 23 data will likely be available in the early part of 2024 for 23. And that will help guide some of the decisions we make around, for instance, recommendations for tuition or salary increases and so forth. So next slide. So to offer some context about the process with which we went through this. So first off, we have identified the last year FY23 ending fund balance. And of course, that's pending audit adjustments at this point, finalizing that. But this has been a very collaborative cross-campus effort across many offices, and folks have been very good about providing support and information to help us to formulate the forecast. This does include this current year's service level changes or the budget rebalancing package that we've just recently discussed. And we've also taken into account this current fiscal year's 5 months of actual budget data. So we've got 6 months or so left of the fiscal year. So we've projected this year in addition to the next few years as well as part of this process. In the last meeting, we also identified the Fund 9 subfund deficits, so about 3.1 million. And within this projection, we've included a restoration plan to resolve those issues. So essentially bring those deficits up to where they need to be. We've also consulted with the HEC in the state to accurately assess what the state funding model looks like for us going forward as best we can. We also understand the model now includes a growth factor as well as components, but will include those for student support and student success. We're not going to get into that in depth today, but it's something that we pay close attention to as that gets rolled out over the next couple of bienniums. We've also investigated some particular factors that drive OPE or fringe benefit costs and projections around PERS contributions, and things like that. Of note, our debt service that pays the FERS bond is factored in to our OPE rate for the institution. So next slide. So to give you an idea about what kind of assumptions we've made here for the next few years. Well, first of all, state funding, the total public resources, the pool that's available to institutions. We are expecting about a 3% growth rate, which is in alignment with historical rate increases over each biennium. So for the next two, we've expected about 3% for this forecasted time frame. Property taxes usually come in as historic at 3% per year, and enrollment increases are projected between 5 and 7% for each subsequent year. And of course, as actuals become available, we're going to model that into this for a biannual update to this forecast. Tuition and fees rates, we're going to use HEPI to come before you in the early part of next year for a recommendation around tuition increases for the following year for 25. We need to make sure that we're in alignment with other state community colleges. Be mindful that certainly this represents a financial pressure for students. So we need to weigh those things in the balance of increasing costs to the college as well. So next slide. The expense assumptions, as I mentioned, about 84% of the college's operating costs are driven by personnel. So in this, we recognize that we need to maintain competitive salary and benefit structures in order to recruit and retain folks on campus. The annual increases here are an aggregate or a collection of everybody, all faculty, classified staff, management. It also includes step increases and kind of the one-off adjustments for individual needs throughout the year, the unexpected. So the increase range that we've included here to be competitive is about 3.5% to 4%, and you'll see some of that come together in this scenario. Remember, we also have 1.6 million of one-time positions that we put on hold this year. They were vacant positions as part of the budget rebalancing package. And so we're evaluating that for the FY25 process. And what I've put before you in the scenarios are not recommendations. So things like tuition or salary increases, releasing essentially these one-time position holds for this year. They're essentially just budget parameters to put into what a forecasted scenario might look like. So these one-time positions need to be evaluated, as I mentioned, for next year, whether we fill all or some or none. OPE, our fringe benefit costs, are guided by historic actual increases to insurance and things like that. The HEPI was used to guide material and supply, as you imagine, with purchase services and utilities. So next slide. So to get into the meat and potatoes here of what you see here, the red circle is where the ending fund balance for this past fiscal year landed. So about $9.7 million. That represents 11.4% for accordance with board policy. So we need to be at 10%. So we're just exceeding that by 1.2 million. So as we look at 24, what you see are total revenue forecasted for this year from the three major sources: state support, property taxes, and enrollment, as well as some other revenue, administrative recovery, and things like that, which show 9.7% revenue growth. Now, keep in mind that a couple meetings ago, we discussed 2.5 million of proceeds from insurance for the library fire. 2.5 million is reflected in the revenues, and 2.5 million is reflected in expenses. So those percentages are going to be slightly exaggerated. So net transfers within that represent intra-fund transfers. So Fund 9 to Fund 1 and vice versa within the college as we move money back and forth. What's the net difference to our operating budget? So this would include, this is where the 3.1 million plus FY24 needs for a Fund 9 restoration is included. So then our projected fund balance, if we restore the full amount to Fund 9 for this year, would be 8.9%, 8.5 million at the end of this year. So then that raises the question, well, we need to have a plan to maintain for board policy 10%. So then how might that look in a base case scenario? So in the very bottom, you see assumptions for each biennium, 3% growth in state funding, enrollment that grows on an annual basis at 5%, tuition, if we consider 2% or something else that we'll recommend next year. 2% would represent $2.78 per credit hour, just for context. Personnel costs, again, aggregate, which would include step increases, negotiations, everything, that 4% of the total personnel costs could be allocated toward those increases, and material and supply 3%. This is what the scenario would look like given those variables over the next few subsequent years. And essentially, you see the red get redder, right? You see 1.3 to 3 to 4% revenue growth, while at the same time we have 3 to 5% expense growth. So naturally, things are out of whack, and we're going to see the ending fund balance continue to decline. And in 5 years, we would be $19, $20 million out of whack or below the required ending fund balance. So each year there would be a subsequent deficit that grew unless we took action, of course, which is naturally what we would do. So this gives you some sense of how the model operates given certain variables. Now, if we change that in the next slide and say, for instance, we have a different scenario with still 3% growth, pretty reliably anticipated from state support. What if we saw enrollment growth of 7%, a little more aspirational, tuition growth at 3%, which would represent $4.17 per credit hour to the student, personnel costs at 3.5%. Now, keep in mind, 3.5% to 4% represents quite a bit, because again, 85% of the operating budget is people. So 3.5% and 3% for material and supply. Now, the addition to this is only filling half of the current vacant 1.6 million in positions. So if we were to evaluate those, for instance, take advantage of that for expense reduction and essentially go through those position by position to determine what's really essential for us to fill in the coming year in 25 and what wasn't. If we kind of take a balanced approach to that, this might look like a budget forecast for the next few years. So in this sense, we would land again 8.9% or so, a little short this year, again with the restoration into Fund 9 subfund with our deficit. And each year we would be pretty close. We might need to make some adjustment to this or that in order to make sure that we maintain 10%. But it's pretty close to a balanced scenario given these parameters. And in the final year, this, by the way, in 28 is where the biennium increases 3% for state funding. So things show a little more favorable. So gives us an idea and a working model to input various parameters and show what the long-term looks like. So in the last scenario, next slide, we show something a little bit more reasonable, conservative, perhaps more practical. Again, state support at 3%, enrollment at 5%, which is the current aspirational goal. Tuition at 2%, being mindful that we're really passing on costs to students. Personnel at 4%, something that we know, again, we need to do for certain personnel where we need to make adjustments and try to be mindful for salary increases. But at the same time, look to not fill any or very few of the one-time position holds. Because at that point, we've held the position for a year, so we'd have to be careful about which ones that we really wanted to go forward and fill. I'm not making any assumptions or suggestions about that, but essentially, what if we didn't fill many of those? In that scenario, then, we show next year to be pretty favorable, a little above 10%, show a $275,000 surplus to the ending fund balance. So we'd have about 9.7 again next year. And then each year after that, we show a declining deficit. So, increasing deficit. So about 750,000 is what we need to come up with in 26. And then a little bit more in 27 and 28. So essentially, this moves things out. We realize what actual enrollment looks like. And in between there, tuition might be something more than 2%. Essentially, it shows us, again, a model, a version of a scenario with certain assumptions about how we might get to at least the next couple years, and then take different actions So in this case, we would need to make certain expense reductions in these few out years. So next slide. Just for big picture here, I wanted to identify some risks and opportunities along these scenarios. And again, we could run an infinite number of scenarios. And again, as actual data becomes available for this year, next year, and so forth, for tuition recommendation, for salary increases, we're going to continue to update that so we understand what some of the next couple of years would look like within this framework. But assuming, enrollment and state support, those are pretty uncertain. We don't have, a magic 8-ball to show us what that's going to look like in the coming year. There's a demographic decline in students you're well aware of, but economic pressures, I think, do represent an opportunity for LCC because traditional colleges and universities are more expensive. So I think there is certainly a value proposition for LCC in this space. Remember, to 84%, that just really hits me in the face of percentage or as operating expenses are people. So continued growth that I showed in those scenarios of salary costs outpacing revenue won't be sustainable. And just to show you what some of the out years might look like at 4% growth over this set of several years, 4% growth, even though it doesn't sound like a lot, in our case represents $20 million investment in people over the next few years. Meanwhile, 3% growth in material and supplies is pretty flat. So it's just something to be mindful of, that even, a modest 4% growth does mean a lot in the long term. Something else that we identified and we've talked about a little bit internally is that OPE expenses at 64%. It does include, again, the debt service on the first bond, but it does exceed national averages as well. So in 21, just for frame of reference, in higher education, the average is 25 to 40%. So even at 40%, LCC still would have an $8 million reinvestment opportunity. So it's something to just be mindful of, that 64% is quite a bit. Next slide. Not to beat a dead horse, but in order to maintain sustainable operating budget and board policy, we're going to need enrollment growth at or above 5% annually for annual cost containment initiatives to some extent. What's forecasted isn't too substantial with reasonable expectations or assumptions within those scenarios, but there is some. So we do need to be mindful about cost containment. This, again, it includes the Fund 9 sub-fund deficits if they're resolved in this plan, or forecast, I should say. It's not a plan. It includes investment. This is an important factor. It includes investment in deferred maintenance or other strategic priorities of $700,000 annually. So that could be a number of them. It could be major projects on campus that need attention, and it could also include enrollment, investments in advertising and marketing to continue revenue growth on campus. So those are important things that we're mindful of. And again, repeated multi-year financial action planning like this, now that we've built the framework or updated the framework, is really going to be essential for us to mitigate shortfalls, because we can see the consequence, essentially, or the outcome of various recommendations or various decisions that we make around cost as we plan that into the future. So with that, I'm really interested in your questions and thoughts.
Excellent. Any questions? I have a couple, but yeah, Zach.
I had a clarifying question. You go back to the forecast slides for a moment.
Slide 11. Is that the slide, Zach?
No, can you go back to the base scenario?
Base scenario, got it. Yeah, slide 8.
Really, any of the scenarios
Mm-hmm.
on state support. I just noticed you have the same number for FY26, FY27. I assume that's because it's the biennium. So it'd be presumably the same money each year. And then in FY28, it looks like there's an approximately 3% increase. Are you forecasting a 3% annual increase or a 3% biannual increase for state support?
That's a great question. So we are projecting a 3% biennium increase. The 26-27 would be the same, 28-29 would be the same.
Right. And it would only be 3% higher than the previous biennium rather than 6% cumulative. So it's really only a 1.5% year annual growth for that category.
Cumulative, yes.
Thank you.
Lisa?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm still a little confused on the Fund 9 fund deficits. So are we like in debt to, like, do we owe bills or creditors? I mean, what does it mean that there are fund deficits?
Good question. So no, we are not behind on any bill payment or anything of that nature. So across all sub-funds in Fund 9, there is a surplus. So across all of it in net, there's plenty to go around. However, what we identified previously was that transfers from other funds into Fund 9, for example, the flight technology program or international program, some of the big items, the health clinic, I think that's a good example. The health clinic did not have Fund 1 to Fund 9 transfers in the amounts that it should have been in prior years. So operating expenses continue to accrue in that fund or sub-fund, and transfers didn't move from Fund 1 in order to offset that deficit. So the deficits continue to accrue. So those particular sub-funds, those specific ones, when we bundle all the bad ones essentially in one bucket, they were 3.1 million in deficit. Many of the other funds still have surpluses. So the total of Fund 9 still had a balance.
So, okay, so across all the sub-funds, there's a surplus. So Fund 9 does not have a deficit at all. And so how much, what is the ending fund balance in Fund 9?
Well, without a specific number, it's a few million.
Okay, that's okay. I can work in that ballpark. And I believe we don't have a policy that we need to, like with our general fund, we have the 10% ending fund maintenance policy. We do not have a policy for Fund 9. So I guess I'm trying to wrap my brain around, like, what is the requirement to do something here, because there's not a policy. And I'm hearing you say that the sub-fund, I mean, across all the sub-funds, there's a surplus. So in reality, it doesn't sound like that fund is operating at a deficit. So I'm not entirely clear on why we need to transfer money from the general fund there. Also, in my experience in the past, we were actually transferring money out of Fund 9 into the general fund at times, because of the history around how the international program was generating funding that was then going to Fund 1 to cover other expenses. So I know the international program definitely took a hit, you know, between 2020 and, you know, not only the pandemic, but also the climate that was created for international students under previous presidential administrations. So, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around what is the mandate here or not mandate here.
Yeah. Well,
President-
so that's a,
really quick, President Bolger, you had something?
No.
Oh,
I want John to go ahead and please, thank you for that, though.
Okay, of course.
And then perhaps Sue to also respond to this one as well.
Understood. Thank you. Go ahead, John.
So what I would say is it's complex, but again, like within the net transfers, those would include movement from Fund 1 to Fund 9 and Fund 9 to Fund 1 for specific reasons. Essentially, this is the concept of fund accounting. Fund accounting means that there is a specific program there, and that sub fund is an individual or a explicit program. So there could be a student club, you know, and a student association, and they have a certain fund that carries a balance from year to year. We couldn't use those funds to move those to offset a deficit in a different sub fund. Essentially, what this was, there was a set of transfers that didn't occur from Fund 1 to Fund 9 over the last, since FY17, really, in a way that was sufficient enough to, wasn't appropriate. We needed more funds to be transferred from Fund 1 to Fund 9 or to boost those sub-fund balances. So there might have been tuition and fees, for example, for a program, a sub-fund within Fund 9, tuition and fees that were collected in Fund 1 that weren't moved by the end of the year into Fund 9 where it should have been. So that process lost its way over the last few years. So kind of to your point of, if there is a net surplus within Fund 9, why is there a problem? Well, it's because many of the identified sub-funds or specific programs didn't get transfers, and we have to do that specifically. We can't balance it all as one whole of Fund 9. Sue, do you want to take a crack at explaining it as well? You might be better.
No, you did a great job, John. I guess I just liken it to because, as John mentioned, there's all these sub-funds that their revenue is coming in for a very specific purpose. And we can't use that purpose for another sub-fund, for example. So if you look at it as like all the board members had a mutual fund together, and one board member went deficit and the other board members' funds covered that deficit. That's kind of what we've been doing with Fund 9 for the last few years.
Can I ask one more follow-up on that?
Absolutely. And absolutely. Then Zach, and then I put myself in the queue.
So, do we have to do this all at once, or can we do it over a period of time?
We can do it over a period of time. What we've included in the forecast is to fix the issue within this year, because we nearly have the ability to do so and maintain a 10% ending fund balance. We can split that up, for example, and maintain 10% this year. And, you know, at the end of the year, determine how much to restore within those sub-funds. And then next year, do the same thing. We could do that.
Thank you very much.
Zach?
Yeah, if we could pull up the forecast again, please.
One of the base scenarios or
that'd be great.
Okay. So I lied to you, Brett, not 11.
So with regards to the previous ending fund balance, my understanding is that board policy is that if we drop below a 10% ending fund balance, then we have to create a plan to restore that balance within 3 years. So did we trigger that requirement?
No, we have not. At least not in this forecast. We may have in prior years, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay, so we did not trigger that this last year, such that we need to adopt a official plan or something, a formal plan to restore the ending fund balance within 3 years per board policy. Okay, it appears that we are projecting that we will not have a 10% ending fund balance this year. Is that correct? And are there ways to solve that issue?
Yes, so the Fund 9, the sub-fund restoration, the 3.1 million, in addition to this year's funds, which would be about 3.7 to 3.8, we could, as I mentioned to Lisa, we could decrease that to maintain 10% this year, and then split that restoration up across a couple of years.
And I'm sorry, where is that 3 million on this document?
It would be in net transfers.
So the net transfers that basically you could slow those down.
Exactly.
Sufficient that we could, at least for this year, maintain the 10% ending fund balance.
Yep, we could.
Would the reserve for revenue shortfall potentially be usable to add to the ending fund balance?
It could, but we have identified, so this year the reserve for revenue shortfall at 4 million. We're considering reducing that to 1.5 million into some of the out years. That's included in these scenarios. But again, that one's to be determined based on what we think of certainty of enrollment. But essentially, at 1.5 million, that's a to be determined.
Thank you.
All right. I'd love to go to slide 11. And John, you did a great job in answering my previous question, which can be found in the information request here. And as much as I would hate to ruin this perfect graph that looks like a stairwell going up, what I've seen, especially on this graph, but also even before the years prior to this, we haven't actually had a 4% growth in the past years or previous years. And a part of that includes things like there's staff going in and out. We are either hiring in or people are leaving. There's people that are topped out on their steps, so there's not necessarily too much growth outside of the COLAs. So as you can see in these most recent years, there hasn't been an actual 4%. And I would even say that based off what I saw in other documents, we haven't seen 4% in the previous. So I want to push back a little bit on the concept that we should expect a 4% growth over time. Even if I would even say, even if there is cost of living increases of 4%, because of, like I was saying, some of those dynamics that of people going in, people going out, swirl, I think was one of those terms that we used. But I know you mentioned earlier in this presentation that it was based off of indicators that other institutions are using to calculate their growth. Can you expand on that?
Well, so I think annual salary increases. So there's a lot that goes into that. So there's of course COLA, there's equity or market adjustments on an individual level. I'm sure Shane could, expand upon this, but and it includes step increases. So 4% would be the whole of all of that. So for instance, if we had a 3% salary increase pool or 2.5%, whatever it is going forward, we do know that there are pressures. There's current negotiations for classified staff. There's some things that we need to be cognizant of as we project it. I would agree with you. It doesn't necessarily, like, this isn't a recommendation or a plan, but it would demonstrate what 4% could look like and how easy that is to essentially increase personnel costs at an unsustainable path. To really increase by 20 million over the next few years, several years, is just 4%. So that, of course, wouldn't be, I think, our recommendation as a salary increase, but I think it's just something that if for instance, we modeled 3%, if we look at the last few years of salary growth, what does 2% or 3% in aggregate look like? Now you mentioned swirl as well. That's something that is taken into account for personnel projections. I think 2.5% is what we forecasted within this, that there's turnover on an annual basis. And that vacancy during that period of time is included in this as well.
Understood. And I know in the charter of the budget development subcommittee, hopefully I'm saying that right. They part of their charter includes forecasting. Did they have a forecast similar to this with 4% growth, or do we know that information?
So I've met with that. I've met with the budget development subcommittee a couple of times now, and so this will be a new process for me going through this particular year. I'm going to work very closely with them. In fact, we're going to have a discussion and share this presentation with them as well in an upcoming meeting to get their thoughts as well. But no, I haven't seen anything like that. But I think that's just me. I think they've probably discussed some of that before.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. Lisa and then Denise. Yeah, Lisa.
I'll defer to Denise for because she hasn't had a first go for a question.
Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. Go ahead, Denise.
Thanks, Lisa. So what I hear about the largest expenditure, the 84% that is for people, is that this is done as an aggregate. Can we have data that breaks it out so that we can see it in a different way? Because I don't think it's as useful when it's just a whole aggregate group. There's just so many different people involved at so many different levels, and I think that would be important. And I'm wondering how does the early retirement fit into that? Where does that show up? Is that showing up in positions that perhaps are not going to be filled, or where does the math of that show up? And just as a part of that, I don't know how frequently the historically Lane offers, so to say, or negotiates or puts out there an early retirement package, because they seem to be, in my experience, a cycle. Right, you get to, and I'm familiar with about every 5 years. So I don't know if that's historical for LCC.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, just my experience at other institutions is that periodically it's a good practice, generally, but it's not explicitly factored into these projections. I think what it would represent is a reinvestment opportunity. So if, for instance, we were to save a few $100,000 in net from the early separation, it would essentially give us an opportunity to put that into other things that are needed for the college. So net, it really doesn't, it's not forecasted into these scenarios. And then remind me, what was the first question?
Oh, about not doing salaries, which is the larger 84% chunk, as an aggregate, but rather.
So within the model, the framework that we've updated, each category of full-time and part-time faculty, classified staff, management, students, all of those are individual line items. So the aggregate is 4%, but each one of those things could be something different. So for instance, if we needed to make corrections to classified staff because if they were below market or management versus faculty or vice versa, we would be able to model the actual of that. For instance, if negotiations, hypothetically were to result in X%, we could put that into staff. Management might be different, faculty would be different. So the 4% is really just an aggregate to be able to forecast upon that of all of those pieces, 4% of the total personnel cost would be used to project the forecasted total amount. And within that, there would be individual buckets that are different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think we've had discussion before, perhaps about those individual buckets, because, we of course want people to have a living, wage. So we need to have a view that informs us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. Before I call on Lisa, anybody who hasn't spoken, okay, go ahead, Lisa.
I was curious about the federal EPC dollars. Am I getting that acronym?
The Employee Retention Tax Credit, ERTC.
Yeah.
Employee Retention Tax Credit. Okay. The ERTC. So a big part of the RRS was to cover that money. And so I'm wondering, what's the update on that, and how, if we get the money, it plays out within this whole process.
Yeah. So we factored that out of this year, which was part of the budget rebalancing work that previously was completed. We did budget it in FY25, so in the next fiscal year. That way, I think it's a pretty conservative estimate. The timeline of that is really to be determined. It's uncertain. because any ERTCs, I believe the threshold was 50,000, needed additional review by the feds. So at a former institution where I was overseeing the same process, it was filed in December and we received funds in the end of July the following year. It took 6 to 7 months. I don't recall when it was filed here. Sue could note that, but it's been at least a few months. So I think we could anticipate that it's either, favorably at the end of this fiscal year, but we're projecting it to be received within FY25.
And Lisa, it sounds like it was in September that it was submitted. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Great, thanks.
Welcome. Excellent. Well, first off, I'm really happy about the number of the ending fund balance. I know this has been a kind of it's been interesting conversations in regarding to the ending fund balance. And I remember the last budgetary cycle, there was multiple numbers given to us during that time period and so forth. But I'm happy to see that we're at where we're at. And I'm very I look forward to opportunities to discussing as we continue moving forward in regards to the ending fund balance. What I also just want to kind of highlight, although we do know that tuition increases obviously are an additional burden to our students, it doesn't look like there's a scenario where there is no tuition increase. So I just want to kind of state that. And I know that we'll have conversations with students. There's a presentation that's usually happens to students to kind of have that conversation with students. And that's a part of the conversation and a part of our decision-making process. Obviously, there's a student who's representative on the budget development subcommittee. I just wanted to state to students, which I'm sure they're watching, that this is a that there will be opportunities for conversations around this, and I hope that you participate in those conversations. Zach,
we didn't really talk about it, but enrollment growth being absolutely key to the fiscal success of the organization, not just to increase our tuition revenue, but also to fight for a bigger share of that statewide funding bucket. The projections kept us at the same percentage of that overall state pie, but hopefully we can increase our enrollment faster than our competitors and get a bigger share of that pie to help our students so that not all that burden falls on students' backs. Thank you.
Hear, hear. I will also say on like a federal level, even funding for the STEP program, as well as the possibility of a workforce Pell Grant is also being discussed. So that is also something to kind of, as we move forward in this direction, that those are the things that are happening at a federal level, even that could impact enrollments, impact affordability, impact just workforce development in general. So these are all things to be considered as we're looking at this. So, oh my goodness, are we gonna end a topic early? Let's do it. President Bulger, is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I was headed toward the next topic.
Excellent. Fantastic. The next topic is going to be retreat discussion. As you will see, we have an agenda for the board retreat. President Bulger, you mentioned something about the equity lens training that you wanted to make mention of. Go ahead.
Yes, I do. We took another look at some guidance that we received from OCCA last year in July of 2022 with respect to training opportunities for the board. And we can go into a session where that is closed, actually, in order to give the board an opportunity to be trained with all of the board members there at the same time. And I wanted to have Mike just give a little bit of guidance related to that.
Yeah, so this is where I get to tell you what not to do. So, you can have meetings as long as you don't discuss the business of the college, right? And so when you're in this training, we're not talking about specific instances of what's going on at the college.
Yeah.
We're not saying, how should we have looked at the equity lens on this particular issue that's at the college. So it has to just be a training about the equity lens and how to use the equity lens. You cannot discuss issues that are related to the college. That is a no-no. So please stay away from that. Just if you have questions about the training from the trainer, that's fine. But please don't say, oh yeah, this is, I was wondering how this would affect this particular issue and things like that. And you all know what I'm talking about. So just that's my one admonition.
Absolutely. And this derives from actually, Mike Eister, you actually mentioned that you wanted us to have this. And so that's where this comes from, is that desire for that. The ad hoc committee input is also in relations to board president relationships. We want to bring back to the retreat the ad hoc committee input. And Zach, you mentioned obviously processes in regards to recommendations for work sessions, which is also being discussed at the ad hoc committee level. So that's essentially where this has come from, is suggestions from the board that we've accumulated and wanted to bring into this retreat. So just wanted to provide that brief explanation of the different topics. We also tried to keep it so that there's fewer topics, because what has been kind of an issue of time with the most recent retreats is that we try to condense a lot of stuff into a short period of time. And quite frankly, I'm also hoping for an opportunity of camaraderie. Kevin, you mentioned that in regards to as board members, and we're hoping that the dinner break will kind of as much as I would love to provide even more time for camaraderie and team building, but I just wanted to let the board know that the conversations we've had over this this time period, we put a lot of consideration into those things, and I wanted to state that to the board. Lisa.
There we go, unmuted. So I just was wondering about in the past, when we've had like very specific PD, the meeting wasn't totally closed. It the public was allowed to attend the meeting. I don't think more than one person ever attended, but we just never streamed or recorded our trainings. And so is that the model we're suggesting, or are we suggesting it's a private training, and then after dinner would we then revert to the more open time?
President Bulger?
Yes, it's certainly an option to be able to do that. You might recall the conversation that we had with the proposed facilitator. We're still finding out whether this person is available, but that is an option. So Mike and I are giving the board the rules, essentially.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for following up on that.
Excellent. Oh my goodness, are we going to end another topic early?
Ask more questions if you want.
I have no further questions on this one. Anything else from the board? All right, we'll move forward with the retreat. Now we're going to talk about things that are going to make me hungry. The culinary arts. We'll start with the culinary arts 1-year certificate.
Yes.
President Bulger.
Yes, please come on up, Dr. Tinkham. And why don't you take both of them, both of those certificates?
Excellent.
Absolutely. So good evening, Chair Polnaghy, President Bulger, and members of the board. The Baking and Pastry 1-year 45 credit certificate program and the Culinary Arts 45 credit 1-year certificate program provides students the knowledge and skills for them to secure an entry to mid-level position in either the baking or the culinary fields. They are representative of the evolution of recent developments in our culinary and baking programs, building off of current short-term certificates ranging from about 17 to 22 credits. As you are aware, our faculty generally come to these and provide you with the additional information. They are not available this evening because they are off contract and they are taking a well-deserved break. However, it's important for this work to move forward because we are on deadlines with the Higher Education Coordinating Commission to get our courses and our new programs in so that we can start them within a certain period of time. So hence, I'm going to ask for Grant Matthews to join me at the podium. He's the AVP for academic programs, and he has worked very closely with these programs over the past several years. And he can provide you with more detail, more than I can, because he knows these at a, even I believe at a dean level at one point in time. And he can also answer your questions. So Grant, would you like to join me?
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. And as we get started, I'd just like to mention recently the Eugene Mission featured one of our students in the culinary program in their Women's Life Change program. So if you have any of their publications, I encourage you to look up their story as they're doing that. Again, these two certificates are an evolution of progress that is being made in the culinary program. As some of you may be aware, a couple of years ago, we initiated some changes in our overall culinary programming. And as we've brought on a new chef, Chef Ryan, he has continued to assess the student needs as well as the industry needs and has recommended some additional advancements in the certificates that we offer. These two certificates are additions onto the less than 1 year certificates in baking and commercial cooking that we currently have. And this adds opportunities for students to look at some additional coursework that will allow them to focus their attention in either a business direction, entrepreneurship, or otherwise, or focus on teaching or other specific areas where they might have interest in focusing their education or their skill sets in culinary and baking. Additionally, these certificates allow for an opportunity for students to begin taking coursework that moves towards their certificate while not being a part of a cohort. The culinary program is a cohort based because of limited lab spaces and limited faculty spaces. And so because of that, we have a cohort. And if students miss the beginning time for the cohort, they're not able to begin the culinary classes right away. These two certificates allow an opportunity to see relevant coursework that a student can begin while they wait getting into a cohort that begins with the actual culinary or the specific skill sets in culinary or baking. I'm open to any questions that you might have and happy to do that.
Yeah, Kevin?
Thanks. This is, always great news, and it's really what I think community colleges do best. And so I'm pleased to hear this. And these may be dumb questions, but how many cohorts per year are there typically?
So currently we're looking at one cohort per year as we've done it. We are looking at how we can increase those cohorts. We are seeing an increased interest in the culinary programs and these new certificates, the less than 1 years, and these certificates that we've had have proven to bring students in as they directly relate to our workforce needs. And so we are looking at how and what ways we will be able to increase those cohorts, but right now we have the capacity for about one cohort per year.
Okay, thanks. And is it possible that I think I heard you say, students can begin taking preliminary classes while they're waiting for that cohort window to open? Is it possible that you'd have more students? You wouldn't have enough capacity in the cohort to, for the students who are kind of waiting?
Yeah. I think that while technically that's possible, we don't see that as being an issue. We see that as more as we're able to increase the cohorts to quarterly, particularly because some of the less than 1 year certificate pieces are able to fit across the year, that we'd be able to increase and take students on. But a student coming in wouldn't necessarily have to wait as long to begin the culinary pieces. And then again, students who were able to start the culinary components with the cohort. As they finish that coursework, because it is intense coursework, they could transition into the more general education coursework that's a part of these certificates and finish that out. So it allows kind of a stackable piece where you might start with the more gen ed pieces or the focused areas on the option areas, the directed elective areas first, and then move into the culinary, or begin with the culinary and after that's done, move into the directed elective areas.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Denise?
So is there an opportunity, is there a link with work experience? Since this is so much of a hands-on and maybe students are already in some of our bakeries and restaurants and things like that?
Yes, work experience is very much a part of these programs. And in conversations with Chef Ryan, as he continues to develop opportunities for students, that has definitely been a part of the conversation we've had of how both out into the workplace with some of our partners, they can gain some of that experience and have it, but also bringing some of that to campus, because as we know, there are opportunities for food consumption and development right here on campus. So there are definitely conversations about how we can provide in multiple different ways students those work experience opportunities while they're within the program.
Well, I don't want to speak for the board, but I'm sure we could participate in food consumption.
As long as it's under $50. Zach, go ahead.
I seem to recall hearing that this program had actually been reduced in the past. Can you speak to, was there a 2-year certificate in the past? What happened?
Yeah, so previously and leading into the pandemic, we had a 2-year Associates of Arts, or excuse me, an Associates of Science culinary program that was a 2-year degree. The curriculum focus was common to many community colleges across the nation that had a focus on high-end restauranteering and other types of things. It was also closely linked to hospitality and tourism management. And as you might see across the nation in many different markets, many of those culinary programs have shifted as the workplace has shifted and other things. And we experienced a similar change here. We saw decreased enrollments in that type of culinary program. And so we started looking at the market and talking to our employers and otherwise, and focused the attention more on some of the commercial cooking aspects and baking and pastry pieces that were more common positions in our area, while still maintaining a high demand for teaching students about how they can get into other types of becoming a chef and other pathways within that. Part of the evolution, part of the changes here are beginning to incorporate some of the entrepreneurial or business elements for students who choose to focus on that, who might look at the culinary skills that they're gaining in these short-term certificates into restauranteering or other types of leadership and management within the restaurant industry.
Yeah. Shorter trainings, getting into employment, essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
So trying to think about the cost benefits of this program for the institution and then for students as well. For the institution, do we have any numbers looking at the sustainability of offering this new program, just to make sure we don't end up in a similar situation of having to cut in the future?
Yeah, and that's really the changes that have taken place. This program, when we made changes to the culinary program, we significantly reduced the cost to the students. Because there were expenses associated with that 2-year program and the model of the curriculum that was there. That was an excellent curriculum, but was expensive for those students, and it had expenses for us as an institution. We've done several things to address the costs from an institutional standpoint. By changing the curriculum and some of the focus areas, there's a reduced cost for food and other items, and there's also opportunities for partnership in some of those areas that provide partners to provide some of the food and other things like Food for Lane County and other partners that can help us, or outlets for the food to take place. So there's several steps that have been taken to reduce the overall cost, both to students and the institution, to address that sustainability.
Do we have projections for expected enrollment?
I can work on getting those for you. I don't have them off the top of my head.
Okay. And then on the student cost benefit side, do we know what percentage of cooking positions in Lane County require a degree?
I'm looking up quality info.
Yeah. I think it is in the document. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Or what percentage of current people in the cooking industry have a degree?
There's a labor analysis.
Yeah.
In the
I saw that.
Yeah, so that's looking at the employment growth. This is an interesting one to answer because oftentimes in this industry, we have students who are exiting high school culinary programs who are able to find employment, who are exiting culinary schools in different areas and otherwise. This industry does not have a really set standard for requirements for entry in. And so I would say, you know, off the top of my head, the requirements for degrees and certificates is low from a requirement standpoint. What is different is that when you have a certificate or a degree like this, you have the quality control around the skill set that the employers are looking for. And we have the added benefit of courses that we offer around the campus that do focus on leadership and other types of training that are recognized by our industry partners. So while the industry itself does not require essentially all of the degrees and certificates, we do see students get a priority benefit when they are looking for work and applying for work by having these skill sets. But again, this is one of the reasons why we made adjustments to this program early on. Is we were seeing that less than 1 year certificate training, the focus on the skill set was providing students employment opportunity directly into the industry. And these certificates, these additional credits, allow for the opportunity to expand the skill set, to focus in on whether they want to move into management within the workplaces that they are, or if they, again, if they're looking to open their own businesses, or if they want to take it in a different direction and they're looking at teaching or other types of things with those skill sets.
Yeah. If there are any opportunities to quantify the value add in terms of increased hireability or increased wages, I'd be interested in that information. Thanks
Certainly.
very much.
Absolutely. Mike and then Kevin.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that several of us participated in the Eugene Economic Summit that actually LCC co-sponsored.
Yep.
And there was a speaker there that referenced 2-week certificates because students they're stackable, so you can pile them up, but students are demanding, they're not interested in 2 years anymore. They really want to get in and get out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a definite trend that we're seeing.
Absolutely. Kevin?
Yeah, on my head swimming. So one of the things is the book, The Great Upheaval, which kind of made its round a year or two ago, you know, really highlighted this trend. So that's interesting. And I'm glad that we're taking advantage of that. The other thing is that, you know, my very unscientific survey of local restaurants, I constantly hear from the employers and the owners, it's difficult to hire qualified people. We just are having a really tough time of doing that. So I think this would probably address that kind of pent up demand out there. And then finally, in your conversations with the culinary and baking folks, did you ever kind of squirt the conversation out towards more of a general like hospitality and tourism focus perhaps in the future, or have you thought about that?
Yeah, so first of all, yes, our industry partners, you know, we are seeing high placement rates for our students that have taken part in these certificates. So there's that. As far as, you know, conversations around tourism and hospitality management, no, we have not had specific conversations around that. We've focused on really trying to build back the curriculum around and address the needs that our culinary industry has been focused on. And yes, I would agree, you know, the great upheaval definitely called attention to some of this. National Skills Coalition, you know, several years ago did a lot of work around this, and really some surveys that looked at how people really are looking at the skills piece, and they talked about the skills agenda in that aspect to focus on helping our workforce skill up, and that focus on those. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So how we would approach this is we would put this in a consent agenda for our next board meeting. We're not voting on this today, obviously. And overall, I'm really excited about this for a multitude of reasons, especially with the entrepreneurial side of things, because we obviously have the Small Business Development Center that this really aligns with, and individuals who are looking for career changes, participating with the Self-Employment Assistance Program with unemployment insurance, or even the TY program and STEP programs. I see them being able to participate in these type of programs. And I agree with you, Kevin, that there is a demand for this. Even just looking at Quality Info, I saw that there was demand for these occupation sets, and I think that the quicker that we're able to get them trained, it creates more affordability to getting into employment and to get into employment quicker. I think as we expand even things like our network, the Lane Community College Network, where we're hoping to, as people progress in their careers and their career changes and they develop themselves and change skills and change careers and maybe even start businesses, even, that we have these short-term trainings that allow for us to then be able to serve those needs within our alumni network. Am I saying that right? Excellent. Good. Alumni network program. So yeah, I look forward to more programs like this in the future, and yes, I definitely see the workforce needs and advantages of this.
Thank you.
Any other further questions? Excellent. Seeing none, that covers both. So for the culinary arts and the baking and pastries, future meeting dates. We'll see you guys next year. In January, we changed the date. Brett, what was the date again? We changed it from the 9th to 4th.
From the to the 4th.
To the 4th.
Thursday the 4th.
Excellent. Great. And then we also have the retreat on the 17th. All right. Any board questions, comments? Zach.
I had a question I sent this afternoon. I don't know if you got to respond to it yet. What's the timeline and process for the board to choose at-large members for the budget committee?
That will be it will be on the January 4th agenda.
Thank you. Yeah, correct. I just wanted to do a shout out to Claire Danenbaum. Is Danenbaum? Yeah. For the recognition that she recently received in regards to her work with the library. As a board member, I just want to thank you for your work, Claire. And I feel that libraries are an important part of maintaining a knowledgeable populace to participate in our democracy. And I really appreciate the work that the library staff and Claire and I really want to appreciate your recognition. And thank you for your work. Any other board comments or questions? We are going into executive session later. So anything before adjournment? Oh, Lisa.
I was just wondering if we had a link for the separate executive session, because Celia usually sends it out before, but I see it now. So
excellent. Good. All right.
Are we taking 10 minutes before?
Yes, we are going to go ahead and take a 10-minute bio break, and then we'll go into executive session. So with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.